Hi, I'm Krista Wynn. I'm a special needs consultant with HSLDA, Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and I'm so glad that you've chosen to join me today in our virtual conference as we discuss developing and drafting student education plans, or sometimes referred to as an SEP. We're going to jump into that here in a few minutes, but first I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about my background and about HSLDA. My background is that I'm a former classroom teacher. I taught for around 20 years. I worked with students of all ages from kindergarten through 5th grade, and then even had some time substituting up in those middle school and high school years. I always had children in my classroom, particularly the last 5 or 6 years of my career, where there were kids that were on the autism spectrum, that were diagnosed with ADD, ADHD, perhaps they had some other health impairments as well. And so I worked with children that were at risk for several years, and so that's kind of my teaching background, my professional background. Nowadays, I'm a homeschool mama and a working mama. I have 2 children, Grace and Elizabeth and Karis Joy. They're 11 and 8, and we are busy with co-op and piano lessons, ballet, all that good stuff. And my husband and I live in South Arkansas, and we are just really blessed to be able to be a part of HSLDA and also be able to homeschool our kids. HSLDA has been around for 35 years. We're a national homeschool advocacy organization that has been working to promote and defend the right to homeschool for, as I said, over 35 years. Our main goal is to make homeschooling possible, whether that's making it possible as a movement or to really make homeschooling possible in the day-to-day challenges of homeschooling. And that's kind of where I come in as an educational consultant. I get to talk to our members and help them brainstorm ideas, teaching strategies, come up with some solutions for curriculum approaches, different things like that. But our members have so many benefits that they are able to take advantage of. Of course, they get legal support, answers to their legal questions, and representation in the legal realm if needed. But also, there are things like full access to our extensive website that has so many wonderful resources available on it, archived articles, and access to the Court Report magazine, just full access to all of the member-only resources that are available on that website. You can also use your membership card to get discounts with retailers across the nation, and you get full access to our educational consultants. We have consultants for typically developing kiddos from toddlers to tweens. We also have high school consultants, and then we have consultants like myself that are working with families that have kids with special needs. So if you're not a member, I want to invite you to visit Teach Them Diligently's virtual conference and exhibit hall. Look for the HSLDA logo. Click on that and learn about becoming a member today so that you can take full advantage of all those benefits of membership. We'd love to have you join us. Your membership not only helps you, but it also helps us to defend and make homeschooling possible for homeschoolers across the nation. So wanted to just share a little bit about that. And now we're going to talk about our topic for today. Now, as a consultant with HSLDA, I talk to parents all the time. In fact, just yesterday, I had a mom calling. They have a child that has some health impairments, and he's really struggling, and she's getting nervous. Do I need to have an IEP? People are telling me that if he was in the public school, he'd have an IEP. Do I need that? I'm hearing maybe there's something that I can write on my own that's similar to an IEP. So this is something that is quite specific, but it is a need. So today what we're going to do is we're going to define what is an IEP, what's an SEP, what's an ISP, what's a 504 plan. These might be some initials and numbers that you've heard thrown around in the past. We're going to talk about who needs one, what do they do. So I'm going to hopefully give you some clarity on that subject. We're going to define all those initials. We're going to talk about the benefits of having an SEP. We're going to describe the different components of an SEP. So if you are here and you're thinking, yeah, that's me, I do need one of those, Chrisette, but now how do I do it? So I'm going to talk about the different components of an SEP and help you put your own document together. So first of all, let's talk about the initials. Let's talk about an IEP. I've found through the years that there is some confusion about what an IEP is, what it does. So IEP falls under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that's IDEA. And IDEA says that the purpose of an IEP is to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free and appropriate public education that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and to prepare them for future education, employment, and independent living. So IEP stands for Individual Education Program. It used to be Individual Education Plan. It's something that is written by the public school, and it's a binding document. So once it's been written, and it can't be written without the permission of parents, and the school system would not write an IEP until there had been a series of meetings, permission had been obtained. Many times certain tests are going to be conducted, perhaps by the school psychologist or maybe the speech pathologist. There's a lot that goes into writing the IEP, but once it's been written, then there will be a meeting, an IEP meeting, where a committee will come together, and the parent would be part of that committee. Now, I told you that I'm a former classroom teacher, and I've been in hundreds of IEP meetings, and I can tell you that they can be quite overwhelming for parents. I know when I was as a kindergarten teacher, those kindergarten parents would come in, especially if this is their first child, and their eyes would just get as big as a deer in headlights, as we say in South Arkansas, when they took a look around the table, because there will be a school psychologist there, the principal of the school will be there, a teacher that's representing the grade level or close to the grade level, the regular education teacher will be there, a special education teacher will be there, the any therapists that were involved in testing, perhaps physical therapist, the occupational therapist, a speech pathologist will be there. Many times the school guidance counselor will be there as well, and then the parent is invited to the table, and all of those people make up the IEP team. And the idea is that they're going to listen to the test results, they're going to come up with appropriate goals and objectives to help that student be successful in the classroom setting. So a lot of times homeschoolers choose to use the public school to evaluate their child and to write up an IEP because they want to tap into some resources that they can get as a homeschooler. And that varies from state to state. Some states allow that, some states do not. But when they walk into that room and they see all those people around the table, they often wonder, are these people all here because I'm homeschooling? And I want to tell you that that's not necessarily the case. That's just the way the IEP process goes. You're going to have all of those players around the table. Anyone that has a part in that child's education or in the testing of that child will be around the table so that they can discuss the best plan of action. So, of course, HSLDA's stance is that we feel that private services are best. As I mentioned, in some states you can tap into resources from the public school. But we feel that even though those services are free, free doesn't always mean free, and sometimes there are strings attached or insinuation is made that perhaps there's been educational neglect if you choose not to use the public school. So we just say if you can swing it, if it works for your family and you can have private services in place, we encourage you to do that. So, but that's an IEP. As I said, it is a binding document. Whatever's written in that IEP, whether it's this child will receive speech services 3 days a week, 30 minutes at a time, or this child can have extended time for testing, then that's written in the document, and whoever's involved in the child's education at that point has to follow that plan. It's binding, right? So that's an IEP. All right, sometimes homeschoolers are not eligible to get an IEP, but they can have an ISP. Again, this is another document that is written by the school system. And many times, private school students and homeschoolers will be given an ISP. ISP stands for an individual service plan. Let me say that again, an individual service plan. It's very similar to an IEP. The difference being that typically you're not going to have as much available to you through an ISP. So instead of the child will come in for 30 minutes at a time, 3 days a week for speech services, an ISP service plan might say the parent can contact the speech and language pathologist weekly for a consultation. So typically the ISP is not going to provide as much service. That varies from state to state whether or not the school system would write an IEP or an ISP, but that's what ISP stands for, Individual Service Plan. You may have also heard of a 504 plan. Again, a 504 plan is written by the school district. It falls underneath the civil rights law, and it's an attempt to remove barriers and allow students with disabilities, whether those are long-term disabilities or short-term disabilities, to be able to access their education. For instance, I had a student once who had some visual difficulties. He had visual impairment, and the school system wrote a 504 plan for this child because the school that he was assigned to only had stairs, and the child was going to have to walk up and down stairs to be able to get to art class or music or PE or various places. So that wasn't going to work for him because he had depth perception problems. He fell a lot. So his family met with the school. The school system wrote a 504 plan, and in the 504 plan, the accommodation was that that particular student would be assigned to a different school in the district that was all one level, so that it took away that barrier of having to walk up and down stairs and possibly be injured. And so that was the accommodation. Another accommodation for this particular child was that the school system would then send a special bus to transport him, because the bus that would typically come through his neighborhood was not going to go by the school that he now needs to go to. So that's one example. I also like to share a kind of a crazy 504 plan, not crazy, but rather unusual accommodation that was written for one of my students many, many years ago. This student had some emotional issues. It was very difficult for him to make friends. It was kind of known as a bully, and so one of the things that the counselor thought would be helpful for him was for students to be able to see another side of this child. And at home, he helped to take care of horses. He was very good with horses. It was a strength for him, and so we got to meet this child's horse. He got to bring his horse to school. Of course, he didn't bring the horse into the school, but he brought the horse to school, and he got to kind of shine for the moment and get to tell his classmates all about this horse, how to care for the horse, and then he got to help lead the horse around as he gave each of his classmates a chance to ride the horse. So it's just, that was part of his 504 plan. That was rather unusual, but it was to try to help break down some barriers so that he could be more successful at school on an emotional level. So anyway, those are an example of a 504 plan. Again, the 504 plan is written to just level the playing field so that those students can have the same opportunities as their typically developing classmates. Sometimes they are long-term, sometimes they are temporary for perhaps a child that was in a car accident and is now wheelchair bound, but it's only going to be for a couple of months, and so they'll make some accommodations for them. You don't need a 504 plan and an IEP, because an IEP would kind of take in any accommodations that are written in the 504 plan. All right, so we're gonna move on and talk about what you as a homeschooler might choose to create. And so if your child was in the public school and had an IEP, maybe you feel like, I need to kind of continue that. Maybe I need to have a similar document now that we're homeschooling. Or maybe you're just feeling like the mom that I talked to last night. My child's never been in public school, but he's had these health issues now that are impairing his ability to work. Do I need to have some type of document that explains why we're working at the pace that we're working, or why we're working at the level that we're working? And so let me talk about what an SEP is. An SEP, or sometimes in some regions of the country, or just different people might refer to this document as an IHEP. IHEP stands for an Individualized Home Education Plan. SEP stands for a Student Education Plan. Really, it doesn't matter what you call it, because there are no rules in the homeschool world that says this is what we call a formal written plan. So you can call it what you want to call it, but there are different names for basically the same thing. It's not a binding commitment like an IEP, because it's a document that you're writing for your child, for yourself, by yourself. So it's not a binding document. It doesn't hold any legal weight, but and it's not required by any state. That, as far as I know, there are no states that say if you're homeschooling a child that has special needs, you have to write something similar to an IEP. But they do serve a useful purpose, and we're going to discuss that here in just a few minutes. Actually, before we do that, I do just want to hit on this idea. Really, our president, Mike Smith, brilliantly stated once that a home education is an IEP. It's an individualized education program. Of course, when you have more children, that gets a little bit trickier, but for the most part, it's still such a great way to give individualized attention to a student. And so just want to kind of talk about that concept for just a minute. That IEP can stand for these broader ideas. What if we said that an IEP stood for investigate. Investigate all you can about your child's needs and really get to know those. Become expert in your child's particular situation. Maybe I stands for identify. Identify your students' strengths, and not just their weaknesses, but their strengths as well. It can stand for incorporate. Incorporate therapies, interventions, accommodations, adaptive equipment, whatever is necessary to help make your child successful. It could stand for individual one-on-one instruction. So these are things that kind of happen naturally as a homeschool parent. You're going to become expert. You're going to really have time to explore and identify your child's strengths and weaknesses. And you're going to be able to offer one-on-one instruction. So let's move on to E. I, individualized. E could stand for an excellent education. So it could also stand for these things. E for environment. You're going to just naturally move your child into the home environment, which can, for so many kiddos, really be an atmosphere where they can really flourish, where they're not going to have all the noise of a classroom with 20-some children in it. Maybe you're able to create an environment that has less distractions. We encourage you to make your environment one that's a positive and loving place where you can meet your child's needs. You can also take the time to engage your students. So E for engage. I know as a classroom teacher, I would just be so discouraged sometimes because it's hard to engage with every single one of your students when you're one, or maybe if you're fortunate to have an assistant in your classroom, there are two of you, but still 2 to 25 is, numbers in a classroom can be even higher than that. So in the homeschool setting, you're able to engage one-on-one, which is great. E can also stand for expectations. Make sure that your expectations are realistic. I know I've talked to many parents that think, oh, if I can just get them into the homeschool environment, then behavior is going to just straighten out and they're going to be able to flourish. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's going to take a little bit more than that. And you might need to enlist some outside help. So we encourage you not to go it alone, to really explore and see what's available in your community to give you and your child the support that you need. So we've talked about I, individualized, E, excellent education, and then P, program. When we're talking about creating a program that's customized for your child, you're here today at this virtual conference. And again, I just want to direct you to the virtual exhibit hall where you can peruse and check out all the different options that are available now to homeschoolers that weren't available 20-some years ago. So there's so many things. I know it can be overwhelming, and if you need help with that, and you're a member of HSLDA, give us a call and we'll help you to try to narrow down the choices. But also P can be for pick teaching strategies and methods and materials that are most appropriate for your child and your family's needs. And then P for prepare. Boy, prepare is a huge thing. So please prepare a suitable schedule and appropriate goals to be working on, and prepare thoughtful lesson plans. And if there's one thing that I've learned both in the classroom and in the homeschool setting, probably maybe even more in the homeschool setting, that preparation is huge. I might have my girls ready for school, and then if I say, oh girls, just wait just a minute, let mommy go and grab this and grab that, well, they're off playing Legos or playing with their Barbies again, and I have to reroute them back to what we're doing as far as homeschool that day. So definitely P for prepare. And then finally, pray. Pray for God's wisdom. Ask Him for His leading. You love your child more than anyone, but God knows your child even better than you, and He loves you and loves your child more than you love your child. So definitely seek His help. Pray, talk to Him, ask Him for strength, creativity, and start your homeschool daily looking to Him. So I want to encourage you again to check out the HSLDA link in the virtual exhibit hall. If you go to our website, hslda.org, you can look for the Struggling Learner brochure, where what I just talked about, the IEP for homeschoolers, as an idea, is discussed further. So encourage you to do that. So we've got IEP as a concept, individualized, excellent program. We've got that. But let's talk about now a real live paper document that's going to be a formal written plan for your child who either has a diagnosis, is just a struggling learner, maybe has some health impairment or visual impairment, different things going on that have you concerned, and you think, yes, I need to have a formal written plan. So why would I want to do that? Number one, it's a complete plan. It's a place where you have goals and objectives for your child, and it's all written down in one place. All right, it's an important document for your child's school records, and I don't know what you're most comfortable with. I like using binders. So you may want to 3-hole punch everything and put it in a binder. Or you may just want to have a file folder with all of this information in it, and just papers are loose. Whatever works for you. I'm not going to tell you it has to be done a particular way, but it's a place where you can store your child's school records. Here's another benefit. It's documentation. I know the mom that I was talking to yesterday, she just felt like with her child's needs, she wanted to have written down in black and white why she was doing what she was doing with her son, why it was taking him longer to complete his work, why they were not working on grade level, in case she ever got a knock on the door and someone was questioning what they were doing with their son. So it's documentation. It contains recent evaluations, not like chapter tests or spelling tests, but if your child's had psychoeducational testing, standardized testing, you can keep that in the child's SEP. It's a place where you can have written out any kind of accommodations that you're doing for the child. Maybe you're giving them extra time. Maybe you're allowing them to give their answers orally instead of writing them out, because handwriting is an issue. That would be just a couple of pretty common examples of an accommodation. So that's a place where you can write down how much therapy the child's receiving. And it's a place where you're writing down, these are my goals for this child for this school year. And so if anyone did ever come knocking at your door, you can pull that document out and you've got it all written in place. It's also great for students that are older and they are going to apply for special testing accommodations for the SAT or ACT. In that process of applying for accommodations, the College Board for the SAT, for instance, is going to ask, does the student have a formal written plan, education plan? And excuse me, you can say yes if you've written an SEP. Now they're referring to an IEP, an ISP, or a 504 plan, but we've talked to the College Board and they said we welcome a parent written plan, because to them it's just further documentation that the accommodations that you're requesting are not just coming from out of the blue or because you think that it's going to help them do better on the SAT, but it's not something that you do in the classroom setting. So they welcome examples of a formal written document, even if it was written by you. So again, it's documentation. So that's one reason why. It's also a place where you're going to write out your long-term goals for your child. Long-term, and we'll talk about this later, but generally speaking, for the year. And then short-term are your little goals that are going to help you reach that long-term goal. And I find this to be really helpful, because I don't know about you, but I tend to have really great goals in my mind and things that I think starting out, oh, this year we are really going to work on XYZ. And then we get to about November and XYZ pops up because we needed to have that established or mastered, and I'm thinking, oh, I was going to work on that, but I never wrote it down, and therefore it just didn't happen. So I think it's really helpful to have an SEP where you've written down goals, because you can refer to it every few weeks, and it's just a really great reminder. Hey, this is something that I felt was important when I wrote this in August. How am I doing on that? Have I spent time on that? What can I do to be intentional about really meeting this goal? So writing it out, that's another benefit of having an SEP. So we've talked about how it's a complete plan. It's a place where you can document what you're doing for your child and why. And it's a place where you can write out short-term and long-term goals. They're clearly defined. The other thing is that everything's in one place. So that's a great benefit. You're not scattered, pulling things all over the place. You've got it all together, and it just keeps you organized in case you have need to share that document with others, which is my last benefit or purpose of an SEP, and that is working with others. And that can be lots of different things, as different scenarios. It could be working with others in the case of applying for accommodations for college entrance examinations. I've talked to parents in the past who have kids that have some real cognitive needs, but also some social and emotional needs. And I know several years ago, I talked to a family who had a child that had to be institutionalized for his own safety and for the family's safety. And so that was going to be over several months that the child would be there. And so the parents wanted to show, in working with the people that were going to be educating their son while he was institutionalized, that they really knew what they were doing in homeschooling him, that they had plans in place. And so we helped them to put down on paper what they had been doing. We helped them to create an SEP that then they were able to take to the folks that were educating their son in this institution. And it was kind of, it's similar to an IEP. And so the educators there appreciated that. It was written kind of in a format that they were familiar with and could understand. So sometimes that could be an example of working with others. In my years as a consultant with HSLDA, I've also talked to families who are going through divorce situations where one parent is no longer on board with homeschooling and the court is asking for documentation. And so that's another good reason to have an SEP already in place. So again, so you're not scrambling at the last minute trying to pull together and put down in written form what you've been doing all along. So it's good to have that in place for that purpose. Also, if your child's involved with a co-op, and this is up to you and your comfort zone and how much you want to share with others who are working with your child. But if you have a child that on the outside really looks like a typical kid, then if you're in a co-op situation where other moms are going to be teaching your child, they may look at your child and have a certain level of expectation just because of how he looks and conducts himself on the outside. But you know that your child is not a typical learner. So in that case, having an SEP and meeting with anybody that's going to be working with your child ahead of time, and if you want to, sharing the IEP, saying, hey, this is how he's receiving therapy for this. This is what his speech pathologist recommends as far as some accommodations. He's going to need to be able to give his answers orally instead of writing them out. He's going to need to have that book recorded and listen to the recording instead of being asked to read it out loud in class. So it might be good to have an SEP in that situation as well. So I hope that helps you kind of think, boy, do I need an SEP? those are some of the benefits. It's a complete plan. It's a place where you are able to document what's going on with your child, and it's a place where you can clearly define long-term, short-term goals. Everything's in one place, and it can be really helpful as you're working with others. All right, so we're going to move on here to our the next section. Let's see here. Pardon me just a second. All right, so now you know why we need an IEP. Let's talk about the different components of, now you know why you need an SEP. Let's talk now about the different components of an SEP. And I will say this, if you're a member of HSLDA, you can go to our website, hslda.org/strugglinglearner, and on that section of the website, there is a members only tool where you can download a copy of a template of the SEP that I'm describing today. Unfortunately, I don't have a way for you to access that if you're not a member at this time, but it is there. But hopefully I'm going to be describing clearly the different components of an SEP as we get started here. So the first part is just biological information. So that's just whatever you want to include there. It can be your child's name, birth date, social security number if you want to do that, home address, phone number, email, that sort of thing. So that's the first component. It's just what it sounds like. The next component is going to be the PLOPs. That's what educators call this section, and that's the present level of performance. So what that stands for, what that means is you're going to talk about what grade is the child in, what grade level material is the child working at for each subject. It's a place where you're going to list strengths for the different subjects and weaknesses for different subjects. And also, if it applies, you can write strengths and weaknesses for other areas like behavior or emotional development, social development, that sort of thing. And you're going to also, in the PLOPs or the present levels of performance, you're going to write down what you have found to be the best type of learning environment or learning approach for the child. So that might mean maybe he's a visual learner. It really helps him to get information if he has a visual hook. This would be a place where you're going to write that. And you would take all that information and you can then write it in a narrative form. So you just write it out in paragraph form. You don't have to do that, but it's something that you can do. Another component to the present level of performance is where you're going to write out any accommodations that you have in place for your child. We've talked about that a little, and we will talk about it more in a few minutes, but that might mean if you have them work with you one-on-one, if you have them give their answers orally instead of writing them out, that sort of thing. Those are examples of accommodations. Maybe this is a place as well where you're going to write down any modifications that you have made to the curriculum. Perhaps he's in 6th grade, but he's working at a 3rd grade level. You've modified the curriculum for him. You've made it easier for him. In the PLOPs, you could also write out your child's preferred learning style, as I mentioned, and just any other skill areas that you can think of that need to be addressed. All right. The next component, so you've got your biological information, you have the PLOPs, present levels of performance, and then you're also going to have a section where you're going to include any assessments that have been done. That can be psychoeducational testing or neuro psych testing that's been done recently, you can tuck that into the section of your child's SEP. If you don't have that, you could also put in there standardized test score results. Again, it's not going to be things like spelling tests and things like that, but if you do keep grades, you might want to include your child's grades in that section too. All right, so here's a question that pops up though. What if you don't have any of that? What if you're trying to write out your child's present levels of performance, but this is your first time homeschooling your child and you don't really know what your child's present levels of performance are? You might have a gut feeling, you might have some vague idea of where they're at. You may know what the school told you, but you're not maybe completely buying into that. So how do you find out what your child's present levels of performance are, especially when it comes to academics? So every situation is going to be different, but you could look back at some previous assessments. I know that a lot of parents that I talk to, they have had their child evaluated either through the school system or maybe even through a private psychologist, but they still don't understand what those tests mean. So a lot of times we'll have them send those test results to us on the special needs team at HSLDA, and we'll look over those as a courtesy and try to put into layman terms what the psychologist has recommended or what their diagnosis of the child's needs are. So if you're, again, just another benefit of membership is to be able to have that type of access. So if you've got some previous assessments, look through those maybe with new eyes and try to gain some more understanding about where your child is. You could also, again, members of HSLDA have access to rent an assessment tool through our online store called the Brigance. That's B as in boy, RIGANCE. There are 3 different assessment tools that we make available to our members. One is for children from birth through developmental age 7, and it's an assessment of all areas of development: speech, language, some cognitive or pre-academic, gross motor, fine motor, emotional development, social development, functional living type skills. So it's really helpful and would help guide your instruction and also help you see, what is my child strong in? What is my child weak in? So that's one tool. The Brigance also offers a tool for school age children that assesses reading and math. It breaks those 2 subjects down into lots of little sub-tests, and so it's very diagnostic in that it helps you to see, hey, this is a strength in math, but these are some weak areas. And so that would guide you and help you to know what you really need to be working on throughout the school year and what your child's strengths and weaknesses are when it comes to academics. The 3rd assessment tool is for older students. It's called the Transition Skills Inventory, and it has some cognitive academic assessment components, but it also talks about functional living, independent living, things like, can the child make change, or do they understand about the components of a computer, or how communities work, and who to go to if they're in need of some type of service. So it's very practical, and again, will give you some guidance and help you to really see, this is what we need to work on, and this we've got it. It's mastered. So we make that available to our members, so please check that out. Most companies that sell curriculum are also going to have their own screening tools or pre-tests, so that would be a good way to determine where your child's strengths are. You can Google online assessment tools that would help you to kind of see, my child is supposed to be going into the 6th grade. What do typical 6th graders know? Is my child ready for that. So that would help give you some information too. And also I want to encourage you to use this very powerful tool called observation. And again, when I was in the classroom, I always told my students that I had eyes in the back of my head, and I did. A good teacher is going to be an observant teacher and really try to take things in, but that's difficult when you have lots of kids that you're attending to. But in the homeschool setting, you can take more time to just sit back and really observe and watch your child, and write down things that you see. Write down things that your child's struggling with, and then take time to reflect that and look over it and say, oh wow, we need to work on this. This is a weak area for my child. Or whoa, I never realized how creative she is, or really her artistic bent. And so you want to nurture those things. So again, what we're talking about right now, we just talked about assessment, and we also talked about writing up your child's present levels of performance for this document that we're calling the SEP. And where we're at in that process now is, what if we don't know our child's present levels of performance? These are some ways to do that. So just simply observing can be really, really powerful in writing down what you observe. If you have another way to learn more about where your child is to go back and look at old report cards or student work samples, and that can also give you some really great information. All right. So the next section of your SEP is going to be where you include goals and objectives. And to me, this is the most challenging part of the SEP, but for our purposes, it's really the most important, because it's where you're going to look at everything that you know about your child, everything that you've learned about your child, and then you're going to narrow down your biggest concerns. In my experience, you don't want to include goals for every single subject. You really just want to narrow in on what's standing out as a major issue. For instance, if reading is really difficult for your child, you may want to write a couple of goals that address meeting that need in the area of reading. Because reading is going to affect the child's writing, it's going to affect spelling, it's going to affect math, it's going to affect science and social studies. We don't need to write a science goal and a social studies goal. We don't need to necessarily write a goal about written expression. As you might, but you don't necessarily have to. It could be that by addressing the reading, then all of those other areas are going to be addressed and encompassed in that one goal. So you want to get to the heart of the issue. If you wrote goals for everything, it's just too much to juggle. So of course you're going to teach science and you're going to teach social studies, but when it comes to this formal written plan, you're going to write goals that really go to the heart of your child's need. So as an educator, I know that goals and objectives need to be measurable. In other words, they need to be written in such a way that you'll be able to know whether or not the goal was met. So I don't think that you as a homeschool parent need to have a perfectly written homeschool goal and perfectly written homeschool objective. There are plenty of places that you can go to on the internet that will give you examples of the verbiage that educators would use when they're writing goals and objectives. And I encourage you to look at those. But let me just talk to you though about how to be thinking about the goals that you write for your child. Okay, so when I think about goals and objectives, I think that the goal is what I'm heading for typically by the end of the year. And the objectives are really the little goals that I need to put in place so that I can meet that big goal. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm going to read a goal. It does have a lot of educator-ese in it, but I'm going to read it to you, and then I'm going to read 3 objectives that I've put together that are going to help me meet that big goal. So, the student will be able to increase their understanding of number sense by ordering, identifying, comparing, and labeling sets of objects up to 20 at a kindergarten level as measured by end-of-year test. Okay, so that's my big goal. I want this child to be able to order numbers, identify numbers, compare numbers, and label sets of objects up to 20 at a kindergarten level. And the way I'm going to measure that, or I'm going to test that, is through an end-of-year test that I'm going to give this child. So that's the big goal. Here are the little goals that are going to help me to meet that big goal. Given a group of objects, the students will be able to count up to 20 objects with 90% accuracy. Here's another little goal to help me meet that big goal. Given a set up to 20 objects, the student will be able to write and identify the correct number of objects in the set with 90% accuracy. So, though that goal and those objectives are what we call SMART. And SMART is an acronym that stands for S, specific, M, measurable, A, has an action word, R, it's realistic or relevant, and T, it's time bound. So, they're SMART, okay? Good practice is that when you write a goal, if you're going to go to that effort to write a goal, let's make it a SMART goal. So let me give you an example. Is it specific? So if I wrote, Carrie will read at a first grade level, that's more specific than Carrie will learn to read. Okay? So you want the goal to be specific. Here's an example of it being measurable. Carrie will be able to read between 90 and 110 words per minute in a first grade reader. That's measurable. Okay, here's not so measurable. Carrie will be able to read better. I don't really know if Carrie will be able to read, if she's reading better, if she's not reading better, if I don't have something specific, goes back to specific, and something measurable, 90 to 110 words per minute, it's hard for me to know if I've met that goal or not. Okay, all of the examples that I've used so far have action words in them. So the student will be able to read, identify, classify, sort. The student will be able to recognize, produce, jump. All of those are action words. So you want to make sure that your goals and objectives have action words in them. The other thing is that they're realistic. If Carrie is 6 years old and she has mastery of her alphabet sounds and she knows a few sight words but she hasn't learned to read yet, it's probably realistic that by the end of the year she will be reading on a first grade reading level, maybe even second grade reading level. But if Carrie is 6 years old, she's nonverbal, and by that I mean that she's not really talking yet. She doesn't even have any concept of what letters are. She doesn't know how to write her name. She can't even recognize her name in print. Then it's not realistic, even though she's 6 years old, to expect that she would be able to read at a first grade reading level by the end of this year. So does that make sense? We want to make sure that the goal is realistic. And if you've not made that goal high enough, it's okay. You're going to always be referring back. Remember when I talked about the purpose of an SEP is that you've got your goals written down, so you're checking in on them every 3 or 4 weeks and seeing how you're doing on those goals. So if you've met the goal, that's okay. We'll just write a new goal to shoot for towards the end of the year, okay? And that takes me to the last T. Goals should have an end date. And usually we're talking about the end of a 12-month period or a school year, depending on how you homeschool. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're making those goals and objectives SMART, specific, measurable. They have action words, they're realistic, and they're time bound. I hope that helps you. So that's the next section of your SEP, are your goals and your objectives. And again, as a member of HSLDA, please give us a call. We can help you to craft those. We can help you to create an SEP goal and objective that's going to work for you and be really practical for you and help you to make sure you're making progress. Okay, the next section of the SEP is the section where you're going to list any accommodations or modifications that you are giving to your student as support. And so I like to talk about what an accommodation is and what a modification is, and when you should use those, because I have talked to so many parents that are worried that they are making things too easy for their child if they're allowing for accommodations, or that it's cheating if they are allowing for accommodations. So I want to talk about what an accommodation is. An accommodation really just levels the playing field. When we think about a student that's in a wheelchair, if they're trying to get into a building that has stairs and a ramp has been built and they use the ramp to get into the building, that didn't make it any easier for them to get into the building. It just leveled the playing field so that they could get into the building in the wheelchair. Okay, the same happens on an academic level. If you are giving a child the ability to answer questions orally because they have some visual and motor issues, they have real difficulty and struggle writing what's in their mind, they can't get it down on paper. If you are allowing for that accommodation, that's not making it easier for the child. They still have to answer the question. It's just that you're allowing them to do it in a way that they can show you what they know. Okay? An accommodation can therefore be a way for the student to be able to produce something for you, let you know that they have understanding, or it can be a change in the environment or a change in the teaching strategy so that the child can take in information. Perhaps you have a child that really struggles with just listening. They have difficulty discriminating what is important to listen to. Should I be listening to the buzz of the lights, or should I be listening to the dangle of my teacher's earrings or jewelry, or should I be listening to what she's really saying, what mommy's saying? And that's a real thing for some students. So for them, sometimes allowing for the instruction to be given in a visual way. Of course, you are going to still be talking, but to also provide posters, pictures, video, that could be an accommodation, a change in the way that you're presenting the information so that they can take it in and it can stick. Okay, so accommodations adjust the setting, the input, how the student takes in the information, or it might be an adjustment in how they, the output, how they present what they know. A modification does alter the content, and it is an adjustment in the quantity that the student's expected to do, or maybe even the grade level could be different. So if your child's in the 8th grade and he has a twin brother that's typically developing, and the twin brother is given an assignment to write a 2-page report on Valley Forge, for instance, you might make a modification for your child that is a struggling learner and say, okay, instead of writing a 2-page report, I need a 2-paragraph report about George Washington and Valley Forge. So that would be a definite modification in the assignment. It could be a modification in even the curriculum. If your child's in 8th grade, but he's working at a 3rd grade level, then that's a modification in the curriculum. So the next section of the SEP is where you write out what kind of accommodations or modifications that you have in place to support your child. And again, just like we don't want to write 10 or 15 different goals and objectives, you don't want to list every single accommodation that you would ever do for your student. Maybe just 4 or 5 that are just absolutely necessary or that you do on a very regular basis. And again, this is going to be really helpful if you apply for accommodations for college entrance examinations, because it's going to be documentation that if you're asking for requesting additional time on the SAT or ACT, that you've got 4 or 5 years of SEPs to show, yes, when he was a freshman, that was one of the accommodations we have placed. I have it written right here in this document. When he was a sophomore, we gave him extended time on tests. This is written down here in his SEP for his sophomore year, and so on. Okay, so that's the next section of your SEP. And then finally, you're going to have a section that's just going to be titled Related Services. So that's a fancy word for any therapies or tutoring, different things that you have in place for your child. Again, in IEP, it's listed so that it's sure to be carried out. But in our SEP, we're going to list it just as a means of documentation and sometimes communication, again, so that those that are involved in our child's life have a good understanding of his or her complete education plan. So you can list their occupational therapy that your child receives, physical therapy, speech and language therapy. Maybe you're doing vision therapy or some type of neurodevelopmental therapy or cognitive training. Maybe you're doing auditory integration training or ABA therapy. Maybe your child is receiving counseling or has tutoring services in place. You want to write that out, how often it occurs and for how long. Alrighty. So that covers the main components of an SEP. The biographical information, the PLOPs, present levels of performance, any kind of record of formal testing that you've had done. Then you're going to have your goals and objectives. You're going to have a place where you write out any accommodations and modifications that you have in place for your child. And you're going to finally list any kind of therapies or related services. So once you have that done, you really have in place a complete plan and a place where everything's documented and it's ready to share or to be given to anyone that might need access to that information for your child. And best of all, you've written it out and you know where you're going. You've got a plan and you have direction for your child. So I hope that this information helps you to feel more confident as you're homeschooling a child with special needs. Again, please visit the virtual exhibit hall, look for the HSLDA icon, and learn about becoming a member if you're not. If you are a member, you can reach out to any of our consultants and we'd be happy to help you with your educational questions. If you have a child that's a struggling learner, please contact us on the Struggling Learner team and we'll be happy to help you, even to create your own SEP. We can send you templates and examples of the things that I talked about today. So just, I know that it's not easy to homeschool a child with special needs, and I hope that this type of document will help you to feel more confident in what you're doing. You know, don't just focus in on your child's weaknesses. Focus in on your child's strengths and know that God is there on your side helping you. Don't go it alone. Look to Him, look to others, and find support. And I hope that this is helpful to you. So this is Krista from HSLDA, and I'm signing off now, and I wish you very the very best in your homeschool journey. We're here to help you make homeschooling possible.